Live from the Twin Peaks studios, Sports Radio 610 presents In the Loop with John Lopez and Reggie Atatula.
B.Scott from Hiram, Clarke. B.Scott from Hiram, Clarke. B.Scott from Hiram, Clarke. B.Scott from Hiram, Clarke. B.Scott from Hiram.
That's right.
B.Scott from Hiram, Clarke.
It's time for B.Scott's Thoughts here in the Loop, Sports Radio 610. John Lopez, Figgy Fig. I'm Reginald Atatula.
Now, how you spelling that?
Thoughts?
Yeah.
We can spell it.
Oh.
We can spell it with proper spelling.
I didn't even realize that.
I saw what
My bad, dog.
I picked up
Don't want to
what
get you in trouble with your
I wasn't trying to do none of that.
I'm good. I just picked up what Lopez was putting down there, but we can do common spelling on B.Scott's thoughts.
Look, if you look,
Nothing wrong with common spelling.
you can look at the run sheet, and I wrote it as just like the synonym for ideas, right? B.Scott's Thoughts.
What Lopez is talking about is a different segment,
Yeah, see,
and
that's-
possibly even a different show.
That's 11 p.m. as opposed to 11 a.m. Here on Sports Radio 610. But no, B.Scott, one of our Texans insider, one of the best dudes to talk about all of these things with, and so I'm very happy, and we're so pleased that we have the opportunity to do this every week. But I kind of want to dig into some of the things that you're thinking about right now. And it seems like with it being game week, it's starting to be, what are some of the things we can learn from week one?
Yeah, so immediately for me, it's going to be like this is a big test for the Texans, not just like the excitement and the anticipation and, you know, the over and under on their win total and all that, but just this game specifically, I think is super important and really just a big test to find out where this Texans team is in certain areas. And I really like some of the things that Lowe's talked about in that opening segment,
Yes.
5 things that they need to get better at. And I think you can tie that into what's important about this week. The thing that I would say concerns me the most right now is that Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor combination in the backfield, obviously the dynamic sort of element that they bring to the table as far as running the football.
Yes.
But then also I think that Anthony Richardson has a lot of feast or famine, boom or bust potential, and there's a tendency to focus a lot on the negative with Anthony Richardson.
That's right.
And the inaccuracies and all of the pitfalls in his game, which I think are important to point out. But he's got a little game too. Like he's got some things that he can actually do to beat you both with his legs and with his arms. He's got some special ability. So I am really concerned with how they deal with that combination both in the run game because, look, they're missing one of their biggest pieces on the defensive line in Danico Autry for the first several games with that suspension. And obviously Christian Harris is somebody who you would depend on to be able to defend sideline to sideline, which I think is something you're going to have to do with an Anthony Richardson the same way you had to do with the Lamar Jackson in the playoffs or twice last year when they played the Ravens. Like you need those elements, and so I am starting to be concerned about them not having those two specific players that I think are important to what they need to do defensively and especially against a team that has these elements to it.
Look, all the things that we're going to be talking about this week about this game, that's the most important one. How they roll with Anthony Richardson, but especially with Jonathan Taylor, and how the Texans can cover that. Because you're right on Anthony Richardson. Nobody knows yet, but he's a weapon. I mean, he is an absolute weapon when when things are going right. So no, I think that is the story. Christian Harris, Danico Autry versus those two dudes.
Yeah, I think they could obviously use those two players against this team. And with Anthony Richardson, it's just a matter of he's got to put it all together one way or another. Like if he is a superstar or if he's a flat-out bust or somewhere in between, we don't know because we've only got the 4 games and some preseason action.
Yeah.
And like literally less than 30 games between high school, college, and pro to decide whether or not this guy is good. It's hard to say one way or another without having the evidence out there. So I think this is going to be another interesting data point.
Yeah, and look, D'Amico Ryans, I was very interested in the last day or two when it comes to Texans. D'Amico Ryans and then Caserio both kind of talked about Anthony Richardson, and I think it's interesting because while, like you said, a lot of folks focus on the negative and what he can't do, it's very evident that other teams have to focus on what is the possibility. And so D'Amico was asked about Anthony Richardson yesterday and his availability, and I found what he said a little bit interesting.
It's been a really great matchup for us to start off the year. Anthony Richardson, as he showed with the limited amount of snaps that he's had, he's shown that he can be a dynamic playmaker, running the ball, also throwing the football. So he's a playmaker, right? You have to account for him every snap just because of his dynamic ability, right, to run the football. So he poses a really good challenge for us defensively, and we definitely have our hands full.
Definitely have their hands full, and you notice he used the word dynamic a whole bunch. Like, I think that's what makes this tough, right? I've often said that he's the type of player that can get you fired, and it's because you have to go in for that dynamic ability, which is a ability to run the football to where the numbers game is tough on a defense. Typically, you're guarding 11 on 10, which makes it so that this is a little bit more manageable. You're 11 on 11 in the fullest sense of the word, and then you pair that with Shane Steichen and his ability with RPOs and play calling to make it so that he puts defenders in a bind. I think this is going to be a real interesting test, as you mentioned, for the spine of the defense, particularly Henry To'oTo'o, who's going to probably get some real snaps and playing time. How disciplined are you now? How good are your eyes? And when you come up and tackle, are you going to make sure to bring down who is a solid body, a couple of dudes who have really solid bodies, and Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the RPO because I thought Seth Payne did a real good job of breaking down not only some of the nuances in Anthony Richardson's game as a passer, like both the things that would concern you or make you doubt him, and also the things that would scare the bleep out of you if you are an opponent or the fan of an opposing team. Like, he gives you a pretty good sense for both of those things, but also this simple fact that Anthony Richardson is not a project when it comes to the RPO game. Like, he's obviously a dynamic athlete and can burn you in that way, but also like very savvy with it. Like, that's the one thing that there doesn't need to be much of a learning curve for him going from what he's been doing before in college and the limited snaps last year and this year. Like, he is well versed in the RPO and obviously well equipped to beat you in that.
And not only that, but an integral part of it figures to be Jonathan Taylor.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now you got the combination. Like, which one of these guys do you want to match up against?
And I'm not talking like old school option. I mean, you might see him one or two of those plays because who you can pick your poison kind of thing. But I'm talking about like even just in the RPO.
Yeah, between the two of them and that offensive line, neither of them is really an ideal or favorable matchup for you.
So yeah, I think that's going to be a fun thing to watch, and yeah, you definitely highlighted it to start in the right way. This would be a challenge regardless, but without your preferred, one of your preferred linebackers or your preferred defensive tackle in Danico Autry, yeah, it's going to be really incumbent upon Mari Edwards, going to be incumbent upon To'oTo'o and the other guys that are going to filter in those places to make sure that middle of the field is well contained and played properly.
But and also, I would just point out, these are also questions that we've had, like position groups that we've had questions about for the entire offseason.
Yes.
Now, we feel good about Christian Harris. The Danico Autry signing, I think everybody would give that a favorable mark.
100%.
But then when we talk about the depth, and this is something I've been hitting on for a long time, when you talk about the depth of the team, specifically the defense, okay, you lose those guys. You lose to those guys, and now what? Now what does it look like? This has been an ongoing question for me in the offseason and the preseason, and it's one that's going to rear its head, I think, in week one. How do they respond? Now, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but I do want to see how it works out.
Sure, and I think that's an interesting thing, kind of balance to strike. I know that earlier in the segment that you mentioned earlier, the start of the show at 10 a.m., we brought up Lopez's 5 things that the Texans need to do better if they want to be that team that ultimately a lot of people believe them to be able to be. And I think someone on the text line took that as, all the optimism's gone. No, the optimism is still there.
Heck no.
But this is getting into the nitty gritty of it. These are the things that you need to see in order for that optimism to be
good to great.
This is more
validated.
This is more intrigue than pessimism. Yeah. Right? Like it's not. It's not
good
even
to great. You were good. You surprised a lot of teams. Now you're talking about being great. We got to get better at these things.
Yeah. And to your the first thing that you talked about, Lopez, about getting better at taking the ball away. Well, as dynamic as Anthony Richardson is, we've seen that they will give you some gifts, or there is potential there to force a fumble. He can be careless with the ball at times.
He'll throw it right to you
because of some of his superhuman ability. Sometimes he might believe in it too much or miscalculate it, if you will. So forcing fumbles is a possibility. Intercepting it is a possibility. Seth talked about this as well, being on the same page with the receivers.
Yes.
Where are they in terms of that? Have they made a jump from look like we're in the preseason going up against Bengals backups and it didn't look great versus going up against most of pretty much the Texans first stringers, save for Christian Harris? it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good stuff.
Yeah, and along those lines, just to wrap this up, I think you asked an interesting question in one of your thoughts here, and it has to do with one of the rookies who got his number changed on this defense.
Yeah, so I want to see the Kamari Lassiter, A.D. Mitchell matchup. Like I feel like there's a game within the game, kind of like the game within the game that DeMeco Ryans didn't want to speak of between him and Shane Steichen. We know that's there. We know that's real.
Oh, yeah.
I think that there is one, maybe even to a greater level, to a greater degree, with these two guys being former teammates at Georgia, winning national titles together. And then also, like, I wonder who, Mo City Mitch. Like, hey, look, man, I know you Mo City Mitch, but hey, everybody from the town going to be rooting for Kamari Lassiter, for your former teammate who is now representing the hometown team. And you, the hometown kid, is playing for the division rival up there behind enemy lines, dog. So I'm interested to see how that goes if they get to match up against each other, the rookies, and what that looks like.
Plus, I think that could possibly serve, and y'all tell me if I'm wilding here, if I'm stretching here. I think that could serve as a little bit of a easier entry point into the starting outside cornerback role that Kamari Lassiter is going to have for the entirety of the season.
Familiarity, you played him. You know his game. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I love it. And Kamari Lassiter, I think another thing was we didn't feel like we saw a whole bunch for whatever reason in the preseason. It possibly it was just because he was doing his job. But for whatever reason, we remember Daniel Jones was targeting Derek Stingley. You know what I mean? Like we want to see more. Like we're confident in Kamari Lassiter, but we want to see more of him. And I think that A.D. Mitchell is going to be a big part of their game plan. Obviously, they have Michael Pittman Jr. as well. So let's see how that shakes.
Okay. B.Scott's thoughts. THOUGHTS.
Common spelling, baby.
That's
common spelling.
Y'all don't say nothing about my man. That's a good, wholesome,
That's right.
family man, Brandon Scott.
Yeah, it is.
Need y'all to understand that.